A slideshow. Slide, Office of Dietary Supplements Seminar Series. ods.od.nih.gov. NIH, National Institutes of Health. Barbara Sorkin appears on a video call at the top right-hand corner of the slideshow.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to today's National Institutes of Health Office of Dietary Supplements webinar. I'm Barbara Sorkin. In addition to organizing the ODS's seminars, I co-direct NIH's Consortium Advancing Research on Botanicals and Other Natural Products, our carbon program. Before I introduce today's speaker, a few brief announcements, two actually. First, our coming attractions. Our next ODS webinar will be given by Dr. Margarita Cantorna from Penn State University. That will be at 11 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time on Wednesday, April 10th. Dr. Cantorna's title is Vitamin D and the Microbiota Immune Nexus. If you're not on our seminar's mailing list and you'd like to be, please see the chat. You should have the icon for the chat at the bottom right of your screen. I will be putting an email address there, ods@nih.gov, and you can use that email address to request to be added to our webinar's mailing list. Next, some logistics for this webinar. In the interest of audio quality, we've muted you all, and we ask that you please stay muted until the final questions and answers. You do have access to the chat, as I just indicated, and I encourage you to put any questions you have for the speaker in the chat as they arise. If I see any that seem urgent, I will try to get her attention to them. Otherwise, we'll take as many as we can fit at the end of her presentation. Please also use the chat if you're having technical problems with the webinar audio or visual or the closed captions, and one of us, James or I, will try to help. And now I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker. Dr. Paule Joseph is the Chief of the Section of Sensory Science and Metabolism in the Division of Intramural Clinical and Biological Research at the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism, the NIAAA, here at the U.S. National Institutes of Health. Dr. Joseph is a woman of many talents. She was born and raised in Venezuela and is a nurse scientist, educator, and philanthropist, and an international expert in chemosensation, so smell and taste, and metabolic diseases. As such, she has a dual appointment at the National Institute of Nursing Research here at the NIH, as well as at the NIAAA, and she's the 2022 through 2024 American Academy of Nursing Fellow at the National Academy of Medicine. Her professional achievements are recognized both by the fact that the list of abbreviations following her name is substantially longer than her name, but also by the fact that she was a 2019 NIH Lasker Scholar. And more interesting than all the titles and awards, I think, is the really exciting translational research she's doing, research at the interface between chemosensation and metabolic disease, with implications for helping people with substance use disorders or obesity, as well as for improving our understanding of the neurobiology underlying our senses of taste and smell, and the effects of these senses on our biology and behavior. Her team has worked on using loss of these senses in people with COVID-19 to better understand their biology, and they've looked at how dietary supplements can affect these senses, as well as at how the taste or smell of dietary supplements can modify biological, behavioral, and experimental outcomes. So I'm excited to see which of these fascinating areas she's going to be telling us about today. And I'm going to transfer this to Paule, and I should run through, I didn't forward my slides, let me try. Just a reminder of the etiquette, and never mind, I'm going to stop sharing and let Paule tell you about her research. And again, you will hear from me if there's any problem with your audio or video. If you don't, you're good to go.
Dr. Paule Joseph appears on the video call.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Barbara, for the introduction.
Slide, welcome. An illustration of a person smelling a cup of coffee. The person's brain contains images of various types of food and drink.
And Let's see if you can all see my slides. Are we good? Okay, awesome. I'm very excited to really give this talk. I've been a fan of the Office of Dietary Supplements since I was a postdoc. So that's been really, really great for me to be able to do this, especially on a topic that sometimes doesn't get a lot of light within the research that we do.
Slide, Office of Dietary Supplements. March 13, 2024. Dietary Supplements, Interactions with Taste and Smell. A list of Dr. Joseph's titles and credentials.
So I am literally between you and lunch, so I'm really, and your delicious meal. So let me just get into it and just really start talking to you about what we know and we don't know about the interactions between dietary supplements and taste and smell.
Slide, Smell how good your wine tastes. A picture of a man smelling a glass of wine.
So before I continue, I just want you to imagine being, for example, a wine expert, and now your wine tastes different, or perhaps you don't even taste it at all. But for many people, getting COVID-19 resulted in a first taste, or rather lack of it, of what it's like to lose their sense of smell. And despite the effects of chemosensory dysfunction on health, these senses are often overlooked in clinical assessments and often even in research related to this area that we're going to be talking about today.
Slide, The Hierarchy of the Senses, A Journey Through Time. A pyramid containing representations of the five senses.
But let's take a moment to really understand the historical context of how senses have been perceived. Historically, sight and hearing have been placed at the top of the sensory hierarchy, often considered the higher senses due to their connections to intellect and rationality. Often taste and smell, as I said, have been overlooked. And this is really taking place all the way back to maybe Aristotle, which really thought about this as lesser senses, and it stayed about like this over centuries, including today. So, and now I remember I need to click these things.
Slide, Chemosensory Perception. Illustrations of apes and trees, and a diagram consisting of animals and plants arranged in a circle.
But from animals to humans, all behaviors of an organism are rooted really in sensory processing of signals from its environment. So natural selection shapes sensory adaptations to ensure successful detection of cues that maximizes fitness. So chemosensation, which is taste and smell, is the most widespread sensory modalities in animals. Which is important for survival, helping to detect food and other vital environmental cues.
Slide, The Biology, Understanding Taste and Smell. A diagram of the human head, with various parts labeled, and close-up diagrams of the olfactory bulb and the taste buds.
So when it comes to taste in particular, so our sensory system for taste is remarkably sensitive. Not only can we detect substances at very low concentrations, but we're also able to differentiate between molecular compounds that are closely related. So at the forefront of our taste systems are the taste buds, which are located, these onion-shaped structures, which are located in the tongue and also in the pharynx. And humans have an average of about 5,000 to 10,000 taste buds. And these are found in aggregate of about 50 to 100 taste receptor cells. And these will allow us to taste, all of the different taste modalities like bitter, sweet, umami, salty. When it comes to smell, on the other hand, the olfactory system, it's extremely complex. At the forefront, we'll have like the olfactory epithelium, the olfactory bulb will get a signal, and these will create innervations that will then send signals into the brain that will help an individual perceive what that odorant is. The really interesting and cool thing about the olfactory system is that unlike the taste system, where we have maybe about 40 taste genes and taste receptor genes, for the olfactory receptors, we have over 400 olfactory receptors. And the way that an individual can perceive an odorant or scent is it's very specific. We can have odorants that will then, like you can have something that you can smell, and that will be through the front of the nose, and this will be considered what we call orthonasal olfaction, or it can happen in the back of the throat, and that will be called retronasal olfaction. So I might be taking you back to maybe a jelly bean experiment that maybe many people have done at some point, in which you will close your nose and you won't smell anything if you're tasting it, but you release your nostrils and then you'll be able to perceive it. So that would be more like retronasal olfaction. And often we like to debunk the myth that we can only taste certain substances in specific areas of the mouth. We can actually taste it all around. So this is really a myth of that we can only taste certain things in specific areas.
Slide, the biology, understanding taste. A chart consisting of 6 columns, labeled salty, sweet, bitter, umami, sour, and fat, with each column containing a bullet point list.
When it comes to the taste system, as I said, there's specific receptors, and we can see here in this image, there's specific tastings that are activated by distinct channels. And for example, you can have sweet that is activated, which is a heterodimer that is activated when we have T1R2 and T1R3 that comes together. And these help us detect sugars and artificial sweeteners. And for bitter receptors, these help us taste things like quinine, detonamium, and PTC. And more recently, there has been this elegant work by Emily Lyman that showed that, the 4 sour up to 1 is really the receptors that is allowing us to taste things like citric acid.
Slide, flavor, a multisensory perception. An illustration depicting multiple sensory areas of the brain pointing to a site, and a bullet point list.
But our perception of flavor really depends on the combined information from all 5 of our senses. So the aroma, for example, for roasted pecan, it stimulates our odor sensing cells through both what I said about orthonasal and retronasal olfaction. And these then, as we chew and really engage in the other sensory modalities, is how we're able to perceive flavors.
Slide, measured attributes of taste. A table titled Taste Perception, consisting of 4 columns labeled Quality of Taste, Intensity, Hedonics, and Sensitivity, each containing a bullet point list.
But when it comes to taste, and one of the reasons that I mentioned this is because I'm going to be showing some data that it's really looking at the quality of taste, but we're able to measure whether it's the quality of the taste, meaning individuals can then rate whether something's sweet, sour, bitter, salty, umami, or fat, but also the intensity by which they perceive in this. And for this, we normally have very standardized scales that we use in which individuals can taste a substance and then really tell us whether something can be barely detectable or it's very strong. And this is what we use a specific scale called the GLMS. And then, but also hedonics, whether they like it or dislike it, as well as sensitivity. So whether it is detection or recognition thresholds. And one of the other things that we can use, and we actually use a lot in my lab, is really doing the fungiform papillae count that allows us to really look into how many fungiform papillae an individual might have and how that might be impacting taste perception.
Slide, taste, and smell disorders. A table consisting of 2 columns, labeled Term and Definition, containing a list of disorders.
But when it comes to taste, there are a number of both taste and smell disorders. And I just want to spend a little bit of time just because I'll be using some of these words moving forward. So one of the things that most people are familiar with, and I would say maybe thanks to COVID, is the anosmia, which is the inability to detect odors. But also individuals might have hyposmia, which is that reduction in the ability to detect odors. And one of the other things that emerged also when COVID that became more prominent is the parosmia, which is this distorted perception of smell that's triggered by a common odor. So for example, you can have coffee doesn't smell like coffee, it smells like something else that is completely disturbing. But you can also have phantasmia, which is smelling of a rose that's really not there. So it's really spontaneously triggered. And then again, for tasting, we'll have, hypogeusia or dysgeusia. And dysgeusia is probably one of the terms that I'll mention quite a bit later on as I start talking about some of the dietary supplements.
Slide, contributors of taste and smell disorders. A list with 2 columns.
So these disorders can really stem from a number of contributors. So whether it's aging, viral infections, genetic conditions, and also environmental exposures. So really understanding the contributors are really important for the effectiveness of screening, diagnosis, and interventions. And one of these contributors that is mainly relevant to this audience are vitamin deficiencies as well as trace metal deficiencies. So one of the things that often gets reported is that individuals that have these specific vitamin deficiencies will then exhibit taste and smell disorders. However, when it comes to the evidence, it's there's a lot of heterogeneity in the evidence as to what are the mechanisms, how is it contributing, what happens when deficiencies, what happens when excess of these particular substances.
Slide, dietary supplements for taste and smell. A bar graph titled Supplement Users Who Have Altered Their Routine During COVID-19, with results listed as percentages.
So we know that, in the quest for health, many turn to dietary supplements, and we saw this clearly as we navigated through the pandemic. Many turn to dietary supplements in the hopes of alleviating symptoms or enhancing overall health. And among these symptoms were like the loss of taste and smell that emerged as this peculiar distressing aspect of COVID. And just interestingly, the Council for Responsible Nutrition conducted a survey in 2020 that showed that more than 2 in 5 of the dietary supplement users had changed their supplement routine since the start of the pandemic. And among those, there was this altered their regimen. 91% of them reported an increase of their supplement by adding new supplements to their existing routines, which is really quite interesting.
A new bar graph appears, titled Top 10 Supplements Increased During Pandemic, with results listed as percentages.
And one of the top 10 supplements that were increased were actually vitamins, and some of which I'll be mentioning in relations to taste and smell. So vitamins and specifically zinc.
An infographic appears, consisting of illustrations of pills and paragraphs of text.
But the WHO then, as you all probably know, really came out with a statement just saying that these vitamins and mineral supplements cannot cure specifically COVID-19, but they can play a vital role in promoting health and nutritional well-being.
Slide, increase use of dietary supplements. A bullet point list.
And more recently, the same group also conducted another survey, just really showing that this was in 2023, that the most common reason for using these dietary supplements were to improve overall health and maintaining health.
Slide, dietary supplements, and sensory system. Illustrations of molecular structures, a diagram of a sensory sensing mechanism, and a graphic consisting of 3 circles containing text situated around a circle containing the text nutritional supplement.
So when it comes to the relationship between nutritional supplements and the sensory system, as well as other senses, this is a really important area and a growing area of interest we need nutritional science and sensory physiology, and many chemosensory scientists like myself.
Slide, taste of vitamins and their influence on nutritional supplements. A list of the molecular structures of vitamins.
One of the things that we know is that nutrition plays a crucial role for health on our sensory system, especially when it comes to the nervous system, which needs essential fats, minerals, B vitamins, and fat-soluble antioxidants like vitamin E. But what we have learned is that since the recognition of vitamins as a requirement in our diet, there have been many pharmaceutical preparations that have been manufactured by a number of companies in several forms, including tablets and capsules and mixtures. And the main problem with their use, the use of these nutritional supplements, is their negative perceptual sensations. So many people will really consider this like off taste. And what we see is that, for example, if we look here, let me see if I can, like vitamin B6 tends to be reported to be slightly bitter or an acidic substance, but we can take things like vitamin B2, which is extremely bitter and dry, and for some individuals, but vitamin B12 tends to be tasteless. And there's a number of properties like this for many of the vitamins and other supplements. And I think that this is very important really to keep in mind, not only as for the formulation, but also of what, how individuals might perceive these vitamins, and whether they actually are adherent into their consumption. And I know things have changed a lot in terms of how they're packaged, really to preserve, like to ameliorate this off taste that many of the substances might have.
Slide, impact of vitamins on taste and smell perception. An illustration of a piece of metal on a tongue, and a picture of a pile of pills.
So when it comes to like specifically vitamins, one of the most common comments that individuals might have is that often they have this metallic taste in their mouth. So many multivitamins may contain copper, zinc, and chromium, which commonly to leave this metallic taste in the mouth. Additionally, iron and calcium supplements have also been linked to leaving this foul taste in individuals' mouth. And this metallic taste was also experienced by individuals that probably took, for example, Paxlovid during COVID. So that's many medications also have this metallic taste. So it's not necessarily only devoted to vitamins, but I just wanted to put this as an example, considering the audience that we have today.
Slide, dietary supplements and taste and smell. A table consisting of 2 columns, labeled supplement and effects, containing a list of 4 supplements.
So in terms of, one of the things that was very interesting as I was preparing this presentation was how much, like how little really we know about many of these supplements and how they might be impacting their sense of taste and smell. So I was able to compile this list for a number of them as I was looking through the literature. And for example, vitamin E specifically, one of the things that was mentioned in the literature is that it really affects the olfactory epithelium and the taste buds, and that vitamin E really acts as a cofactor and has been attributed in changes in taste and smell. And however, in what direction is it that it's been attributed, that was not very clear in the literature. So when we're talking about changes, we want to really understand whether the changes are in identifying like the quality of the taste, whether it's on the sensitivity of a specific taste, tastings. So we like those details were very, very limited in terms of the data that it's currently available. When it comes to zinc, zinc supplementation has been considered to be both therapeutic and preventive in the treatment of dysgeusia. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on zinc because zinc is one of those supplements that often we see being prescribed quite a bit in clinic, since in some ways it starts to be a little bit harmless, and for some individuals it may work, for others it may not work. But it really, the point is that in order for us to really be able to treat a taste and smell disorder, we need to understand the underlying pathology that is leading to that disorder. So I'll spend a little bit more time on zinc. When it comes to vitamin D, one of the main reports is like triggering burning mouth syndrome, and also seeing that there's an increase in smell loss due to vitamin D insufficiency. Again, the data is very sparse into really highlighting whether it's identification of certain smells, or is it like, again, sensitivity for certain smells that is lost. Folic acid here, just really about ulcerated mouth, the red tongue, and diminished sense of taste. And really, when folic acid, one particular important thing to note is that it's very important in the stimulation and activation of bitter taste receptors that, as I mentioned earlier, play a role in bitter taste perception specifically.
Slide. The table continued, with 4 more supplements listed.
And same thing we saw in terms of niacin of B3, that has an impact on actually flavor, and that was a typo, I'm sorry. And there's also like low niacin can result in black tongue syndrome, and specifically, so it's really thought as like the anti-black tongue factor. When B6, again, burning mouth syndrome, B12, we've seen that it disrupts the epithelial cells, really affecting regeneration of the taste buds in specifically. And there was only like 1 or 2 papers that I was able to find that really talked a little bit into how B12 might be impacting the changes in smell, and primarily associated with insufficiency or deficiency. Other things that alpha lipoic acid and vitamin C, really not a lot there, and very unclear on how it's really linked. We can think in terms of decreased inflammation if there's an inflammatory component, but there's really not a lot of work done in this area.
Slide. Impact of micronutrients on taste. A numbered list.
So there was this recent paper that was published last year by Eunice that really, I think that was the most elegant review, just really going over what we know about the impact of micronutrients, and specifically on taste. There's really very little mention in terms of smell, and this is really just summarizes a little bit of this, specifically with B12, and how deficiency might lead to redness of the tongue, absence of the papillae, that we were able to see in the early images that I shared. But specifically with vitamin D and B6 and B9, and how it might impact bitter taste perception specifically, and how it might may activate or not activate those receptors for bitter sensation. And then the niacin that I was able to mention to you earlier. And so the main thing from this particular paper, which I really thought was very elegant, was really the main comment was really that we needed more studies with control numbers and the control confounding factors to really understand how these supplements might truly be impacting both taste and smell. And I would say that one of the gaps that I was able to see in the literature specifically to this area is that often they will say taste when they're probably referring to flavor. So there's really not a lot of systematic measurement about from taste or smell to really determine what exactly it's happening within the chemosensory system.
Slide, screenshots of articles.
So I said that I would spend a little bit more time on zinc, and one particular reason is that over the years, there's been a lot of contention within the field as to whether zinc really helps, whether it doesn't help, what happens when we have or don't have zinc. So one of the most elegant papers was this paper by Russell Keys that look at the effect of zinc on human taste perception.
Slide, zinc, and taste perception. 2-bar graphs, titled Bitter and Salty, and a bullet point list.
And believe it or not, this paper was actually published back in 2003, and since then there hasn't really been a lot of work really eliciting what is happening to individuals in terms of this specific sense taste modalities. So this was a study that was conducted in about 18 individuals that were able to test a number of substances, and the subjects were naive to the contents that they were actually testing. And one of the first things that Keys actually looked at was the lingering effects of zinc in the oral cavity. So they used these variations of zinc and really looked as, how individuals will rate the intensity. So going back to how strong or how weak that particular perception was. So in this particular image, we can see that individuals really didn't necessarily think of it as much to be bitter or really to be salty.
2 new graphs appear, titled Savory and Sour.
And then same goes for like savory, that they thought that was really weak. When it came to like sour, some individuals did report and felt like it was a little bit sour, but the majority, and this was actually done after water rinses. So they will taste each of the substances and they will rinse their mouth and then report whether they had this lingering effect in their mouth.
Slide, zinc, and taste perception. 2-bar graphs titled Tingle/Sting, and Astringency, and a bullet point list.
They also report whether they was tingling, and that was not an attribute that was reported by many of the participants. However, when astringency was the most dominant oral sensation that was associated with zinc salts. So unlike the taste that was being washed with the previous modalities, when it came to astringency, this was not significantly reduced after 2 water rinses for these individuals.
Slide, zinc, and taste perception. A bar graph titled Zinc and Magnesium Influence on Sweet Taste.
On the second part of this particular study was really trying to understand the combined effect of zinc salts when this basic taste, really understanding what is the effect that zinc and magnesium, for example, will have on sweet taste perception. And these were, again, the same subjects that were able to taste these substances and a number of concentrations. So, for example, for glucose, they received glucose at 0.4 millimolars, all the way up to 2.4 molars of sucrose. And what we were able to see is that zinc was a potent inhibitor of sweetness as well as bitter.
A new bar graph appears, titled Zinc and Magnesium Influence on Bitter Taste.
So we were able to see that when you had zinc added with either glucose or quinine, you can see that it would be an inhibitor for sweetness and bitterness.
Slide, zinc, and taste perception. 3-bar graphs, titled Zinc and Magnesium Influence on Salt Taste, Savory Taste, and Sour Taste.
But we didn't see this in particular when either sour, saltiness, savory, or sour taste. So as you can see here, none of these were actually significant. And I think that this is really interesting. But I feel like one of the things that's been missing out of this literature is really understanding how the adding zinc really blocks. What are the mechanisms that are really leading to blocking the or enhancing the perception of sweetness or bitterness when we add zinc and magnesium together for participants. So sadly, there hasn't been much follow-up to this study, really in trying to, in a larger number of individuals. As I said, this was only 18 participants that were tested at the time. And one of the things that I was mentioning to Barbara earlier as I got into this presentation is that I see so many gaps and so many things that needs to be done. I feel like we need to start doing some of this work also within my lab, just to really understand more about these effects of these dietary supplements.
Slide, zinc, and taste perception. A table with 8 columns, containing a list of experiments.
More recently, also in 2023, there was this meta-analysis of the effect of zinc replacement for the treatment of taste disorders. So it's primarily being, as I mentioned earlier, being thought to really help when taste disorders in specifically. And this was 5 studies with a total of 508 cases of individuals that had idiopathic and zinc deficiency taste disorders. So in particular, one of the things that that we were able to see when the pooled results in this meta-analysis is that it indicates that taste disorders improve. There's an improvement that occurs significantly more frequently when a group is supplemented. So if we can see here, this is the experimental group and the control group, and it's when we look at the overall effect of this supplement, we see that that more frequently there's an improvement for those individuals that have zinc deficiency associated taste disorder, which is what we would expect.
Slide, zinc and taste perception in patients with chronic renal failure. A table with 8 columns, containing a list of experiments.
Another example that was looked at was really what is the effect of zinc and taste perception in patients that have chronic renal failure. So we know that individuals that have chronic renal failure, they'll have a number of deficiencies. Among those will also be zinc. And in this particular pool, it was 3 specific studies by the same group, but as we can see, they're quite older studies, and there hasn't been any additional studies that has been done systematically since then, really looking at the effects of zinc in this population. But again, yes, this supplementing zinc in this particular group also led to the to significant improvement in their complaints of taste of dysgeusia in particular. And again, the one thing that I would add to this is that, you know, one of the challenges looking across the literature is that often different groups use different zinc formulations. So it's also really hard to really pull data to really understand whether these have a significant effect.
Slide, a graphic depicting the symptoms of COVID, with a virus cell in the center, surrounded by various symptoms.
So I mentioned COVID. We're all familiar with COVID and loss of taste and smell.
Slide, SARS-CoV-2 attacks smell and taste symptoms. Diagrams of olfactory bulbs, olfactory epitheliums, and respiratory epitheliums.
And one of the things in particular that that we learned in terms of with COVID is that in terms of all the reports, really it was showing that in part ACE2 was not expressing the olfactory sensory neurons, but it was yet the supporting cells were being affected, which impaired the function of the olfactory sensory neurons, causing olfactory disorders. And there was follow-up papers that by ourselves and others that really confirmed that ciliated cells are the main target cells for the SARS-CoV-2 in the respiratory mucosa. But the substentacular cells are the main target by the virus, and these are the cells that are actually affected. And there was no evidence of the olfactory sensory neurons on the olfactory bulb parenchyma. One of the hypotheses earlier was that, inflammation is really attributing to a lot of this persistent in the acute phase, as well as the persistent olfactory disorders that occurred with this particular virus.
Slide, parosmia and phantosmia, COVID-19. A screenshot of an article headline and a list of authors.
And one of the things that we were able to show is that when it comes to both quantitative and qualitative olfactory dysfunctions, there was an increase in those that were patients that were recovering from COVID smell loss.
Slide, parosmia and phantosmia increase, more for women. 2 bar graphs comparing the conditions in men and women.
So in particular, we saw that, for example, more women were actually reporting parosmia, which is that distortion in smell that I shared earlier, as well as parosmia, and this was compared to men. And I'll tell you why in a second as to why I'm mentioning these specific disorders, because again, many of these individuals, especially even we just started to do some preliminary analysis of the data that we have, we're actually turning to dietary supplements to really see if they can improve their parosmia, their phantosmia, or even their anosmia.
Slide, olfactory deficits in COVID, inflammation and zinc. An illustration depicting the process of infection inside a person's sinus cavity.
One of the things that we know is that it's unlikely that COVID-related changes in smell and taste perception are related to zinc deficiency. However, there's been this recent data that suggests a possible indirect link through reduced odorant receptor levels in response to the innate immune signaling. So this is a proposed model that explains the insurgence and maintenance of olfactory symptoms with SARS-CoV-2 pathology, in that we see that in the olfactory epithelium, the viral infection will lead to this inflammation, and then there's some subsequent decrease in zinc levels, resulting in immune response and in this insurgence of these olfactory symptoms. So really thinking about this as a feedback loop that is leading to these persistent olfactory disorders in these individuals, whether it's persistent anosmia or phantosmia or any of the other olfactory disorders.
Slide, smell long haulers, sicker overall. 2 columns containing bar graphs comparing symptoms in long haulers and non-long haulers, and a scatter plot comparing symptom counts in the 2 groups.
So what we know is that these individuals who are smell long haulers are sicker overall. There's changes in flavors that occur, as well as changes in smell, which as I mentioned, but also a number of other things like brain fog, as well as loss of appetite and headaches.
Slide, a screenshot of an online article, and 2 quotes.
This is very important, and I shared this particular example from this chef that said that the steak tasted very metallic, and I just licked the side, like I licked the side of a car, and I cooked squash, and it tasted like rotten flesh. And it's like, and these comments are really some of the comments that we're seeing when a lot of individuals that have COVID But also, even before COVID, there were individuals that were having taste and smell disorders, but it was just really just not at the forefront for many of us. The issue here is that in terms of treatment, even as I just shared, it seems like maybe potentially zinc could help. We didn't see that really helping when COVID-19 related taste and smell loss, and potentially based on that feedback loop that I shared with you that it's occurring when individuals.
Slide, omega-3 supplementation for smell dysfunction. A screenshot of an article headline and a list of authors, and 2 bar graphs comparing omega-3 and no omega-3 supplementation over a period of 6 months.
I tried to look to see, at least for something in terms of like olfaction and what some of the supplementations that might be improving smell dysfunction. And there was really this most recent paper by Jan and Sarah Patel out of UCSD, just primarily looking at a specific population, again, not COVID, just individuals that had smell dysfunction following a specific endoscopic surgery. And this was a randomized controlled trial where they had 110 patients that were undergoing this particular therapy, and they had undergone the UPSET, which is the University of Pennsylvania smell identification test. So it's really particularly looking at identification. And they had this at 6 weeks, at 3 months, and at 6 months respectively, while they were also getting supplementation for omega-3. So those that are in the black bar are the ones that did not receive omega-3 versus those that received omega-3. And what it appears is that omega-3 supplementation might be protective for olfactory system in the healing period for patients who undergo these particular resections. There hasn't been a follow-up to this randomized controlled trial. And one of the questions is whether this would be true for other types of olfactory disorders. Is it only specific to identification, but could it also impact threshold and sensitivity for these individuals? And this was not something that was looked at.
Slide, management. A picture of 3 glass bottles filled with liquids.
So I alluded a little bit in terms of the management. We were in trouble before COVID, and we continue to be in trouble in terms of how we manage these olfactory disorders.
Slide, treatment. 2 lists of substances, titled More Evidence and Less Evidence.
Sadly, in terms of where the evidence is, even when we look at the things that have the less evidence of whether it works or not, it includes some of these dietary supplements, whether it's omega-3, alpha-lipoic acid, zinc, vitamin D, ginkgo biloba, vitamin A. Again, it's just really whether it would work or not. It depends on a number of factors, what it's leading to the olfactory disorder, how long an individual has had that particular disorder. The one thing that has been shown to have more evidence around whether it works or not is also it's primarily olfactory training. And there's been some newer evidence that is showing whether the combination of maybe olfactory training with some of these dietary supplements may help in ameliorating these olfactory disorders, but this is really too early to tell. But as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to having a patient go to a clinic, whether it's a primary care provider, and just thinking about what is the toolkit that or guidelines that are associated, like that we have to be able to give treatment to these individuals is really non-existent. There could be a possibility of what could work. You could, as I mentioned, you can see that most individuals will get potentially steroids and zinc and be followed up and in the hopes that it will work.
Slide, summary of what we know so far. A numbered list.
So in terms of what we learned so far, it's that, the impact on taste, we know that some of these nutritional supplements are known to affect taste and smell. Whether there is deficiencies or excess, how these particular supplements are impacting, really, it's needs additional area of research. Deficiency in sensory impairment, as I mentioned, what are these particular, besides the ones that I mentioned, what other vitamins and traces and supplements are leading to potentially taste and smell dysfunction, as well as antioxidants that might be contributing to the overall health, but also the maintenance of the sensory system, and specifically against oxidative stress or damage. In terms of the neurological benefits, there's indirect effects on the sensory system. However, this is, again, one of these things that we need additional evidence for. For example, whether B vitamins, we know that B vitamins are essential for nerve function, and they could potentially be influencing the sensory system performance by supporting nerve health. And let's see, and also like herbal supplements, as whether it's ginseng and ginkgo biloba that have been claimed to have an impact in sensory health, also needs scientific support. And just really understanding what are the adverse effects when it comes to high dosages of these particular supplements. And as I kind of alluded throughout, it's really just, we need additional research in this area. And I highlighted a couple of gaps that I want to share, that I pulled together.
Slide, gaps in research, dietary supplements with taste. A numbered list.
One, it's in particular in looking at the mechanisms of action. So really understanding how dietary supplements interact with the sensory system for taste and smell at the molecular and cellular levels. There's a need for more research on how these substances affect these receptors and pathway involved in these areas. Looking also at individual variability, really understanding how genetics, age, sex, and health status and environmental factors influence the efficacy and perception of dietary supplements, in particular when it comes and how they support or not support the sensory health. In terms of the impact of health and nutrition, how might changes in these senses affect nutritional status, food choices, and overall health, which is an area that I'm particularly interested in. But so whether there might be changes that occur, how we know like some of the dietary supplements are known to have an effect on taste and smell, whether it's positive or negative, how that might influence the overall health and nutrition, as well as safety and efficacy, just really more work in relations to taste and smell, and clinical trials to assess the safety and efficacy of the dietary supplements as they're being used as a treatment modality for some individuals, but also like the lack of standardization, as I mentioned, even across studies, make it very difficult to study the effects of these supplements consistently. More in terms of like the connections of like these perceptions and their psychological effects, as well as integration of the sensory information. So understanding how dietary supplements influence the integration of taste and smell with other sensory inputs. So like texture and appearance.
Slide, implications for nutrition. The covers of 2 books, titled Taste and Flavor, and Sensory Science and Chronic Diseases.
Patients are really desperate, and these are a book that was written by patients in terms of guidance and recommendation that they're giving to each other. Not that I'm promoting this, but it's just really highlighting the importance that it has as they're really seeking for help.
Slide, section of sensory science and metabolism. Pictures of a group and individuals. 7 bullet point lists, containing names of people in various departments. Logos of Office of Intramural Training and Education, Johnson & Johnson, the Rockefeller University, NIH, and National Academy of Medicine.
And when this, I will stop here and ask any questions that you might have and really receive any ideas that you might have. And I really thank all the members of my lab and all of the individuals that have been able to support me in doing this work here at NIH.
Slide, thank you. SenseMet, section of sensory science and metabolism.
And with that, I say thank you.
Barbara Sorkin reappears on the video call.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paule. We have lots of questions in the chat, so
Okay.
I'm going to start working through them in our remaining time. One of the questions that I had and that my colleague in the Office of Dietary Supplements, Carol Higgins, asked a version of is, I've heard many times that when you use zinc supplements, often people take them to try to shorten the duration or the symptoms of an upper respiratory infection. And I have heard that that can actually cause anosmia or dysnosmia in many people. And so you're talking about zinc deficiency also causing anosmia. And Carol asks whether there are different effects in people who are already adequate for zinc, at least on taste, versus people who have zinc deficiency.
That's such a wonderful question, and it's a great question because as we know, like upper respiratory infections, many colds will lead to a very temporary transient. Individuals might not be able to perceive the flavor of food the same way, right? But it doesn't lead to persistent. We don't see it as often, the persistent smell loss. But one particular thing that that we really don't know is how it differs when individuals that have optimal zinc levels. So like whether if you have an optimal zinc level, you get an upper respiratory infection, how, what is the likelihood that you'll develop permanent anosmia, or whether the people who are developing permanent anosmia is because they were already deficient to begin with. Often we don't even get, I don't know about all of you, but I don't know that the last time my zinc levels or anything got tested. So it's really hard to really say, what's coming before or what's coming after. I think that, one of the things that I've been advocating for is, we don't have baselines for what people factory perception is. Like we really don't. So we don't even know if they were already deficient and now this is being magnified when this or anything else. And I don't like whether when is the last time you got your smell checked. It's probably never. So that though, I think that these are again gaps that exist that we really need to get more information to really understand, be able to address this question a little bit better.
These are great points, Paula. This is something that we, some of the things that we preach in the Office of Dietary Supplements is when you're doing a study on dietary supplement use, first of all, know your baseline levels of how much is already in the person, because you're not going to see an effect on insufficiency if the person is already sufficient. And another is know what you're actually supplementing with. Is it zinc chloride? Is it zinc acetate? Because you showed that they do have different effects. And then you were just saying, should you, when you go for your annual physical and they check your reflexes and your hearing, should they also be testing whether you can tell the difference between the smell of the rose and the smell of the, day-old trash?
That's my goal. That's what I've been trying to advocate for.
What other things can we learn from that? So many presentations. One is, do you see, and a nice, my colleague Abby Ursha says that the Michael J. Fox Foundation has been sending out olfaction test scratch kits as part
Yes.
of a Parkinson's prediction study. So people
Yes.
might want to explore that. And my colleague, Dr. Laverne Brown in the office asks whether you see differences across different ethnic groups and ages in taste and smell perception. I would assume that based on, both prenatal and postnatal experience, people have different affinities for familiar flavors.
Yes. So there's quite a bit of evidence that shows sex differences as well as difference across groups. We also need to take in context cultural experiences and exposure when it comes to some of these measurements. But there's been quite a bit of work in this area for sure. In terms of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, so that particular send out and study, it's really stemming from the fact that one of the things that we know is that at least olfactory decrease in olfactory perception occurs at least 10 years earlier before any other symptoms for some individuals that have Parkinson's disease. We also see this with Alzheimer's. We see, the hyposmia also when frontal temporal lobe dementia. So really, as you said, it's fairly simple. It's a fairly simple test that when some explanation individuals can do. But I think the main issue goes back and stems from there's very little training that occurs either in medical school or nursing school on measuring their sense of smell. It's really the cranial nerve that most people skipped. But it's really one of those things that really creates questions for us can we use this as a biomarker for some diseases that non-invasively? But if we measure something, how do we help people and manage those disorders if we don't have appropriate treatments? So that's why I think we need more evidence even about using some of these supplements to really help in sustaining maybe chemosensory health.
There are so many great questions, and we're just about at the hour. I would ask one as a biochemist, protein chemist. I'm wondering whether anyone has looked at how some of the vitamins, like the metals, magnesium, zinc, could they be interacting directly with the ability of the taste receptors to function as receptors or modulating their effects, their mechanisms?
Yes, that is a very good question in the sense that yes, they could be impacting in terms of the transduction pathways and how how they might be interfering when the transduction pathway for both taste and smell. But one of the things that, as I mentioned, is there's very little work that has been done to really identify, this, at this level, this is how it's impacting, either taste perception or olfactory perception and the transduction for us that allows us to perceive particular odorants. So I think that there's just more work that needs to be done in this particular area. And I see
it sounds like there are lots of gaps. What I'm going to do is save the chat and send it to you. So, and in your enormous spare time, perhaps you can answer some of the questions and we can post them. But I want to thank you for a fabulous and fascinating presentation, and we'll need to follow up with you on some of those gaps. I think we need further conversations. So
thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm just taking notes of the questions because I think they're very good. So as people are coming out, I'm just taking notes of those particular questions, especially
I'll send you the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, fantastic. Yes, so I can email Joanne and a few others.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Because there
you.
are lots of questions and people asking what to do about their, you know, their post-COVID persistent loss of taste or smell or other loss of taste or smell. And, you know, of course, we all know that often in elders, they have less taste and smell perception, and perhaps that's one of the reasons their appetites diminish to the problem. And so many great questions and so much we can learn both ways, I think. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. See you next month.
Text, Drew Zerko.
Hi, Barbara. I just sent you a chat. Were you able to see that? I'm not sure if it went through.
Drew, is that Drew?
Yes.
Yes. And if you send it to that od@nih.gov, they can forward it to me, okay?
Okay. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thank you so much for a great talk.
Yeah, I was trying to get as much more information and just concentrating on things based on our discussion. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot just pulling some of these things, and I see some of those questions, and I'm like, I need more people to work on this.
All right. We hear you.
Thank you.